Welcome to Bobby Owsinski's Inner Circle. I'm Bobby Owsinski, and this is a show all about music, music production, and the music business. My guest today is Mike Diaz, Sales Director for Ultimate Ears. But first of all, let's talk about Amazon's brand new music delivery service. Yes, they finally launched their streaming service, and it's called Amazon Music Unlimited. And it has a lot of interesting features. First of all, it's $7.99 a month. $7.99. Amazon also has a $3.99 per month tier. And what's interesting there is you have to own a piece of Amazon hardware, like an Echo or the brand new Dot, in order to qualify for that, because your music only streams out of that piece of hardware. So what's the catch with these low prices? Well, you have to be an Amazon Prime member. Otherwise, you're paying the full pop. You're paying $9.99 per month. So, is this a good deal? Well, it doesn't seem like it, because if you pay $99 a year already for Amazon Prime, you're also paying another $7.99 or $3.99 a month after that. Not only that, you're already getting a music service with Amazon Prime. It's called Amazon Prime Music. So what's the difference? Well, Amazon Prime Music has a couple million tunes, where Amazon Music Unlimited has tens of millions. They don't say how many, they just say tens of millions. But not only that, you also get a brand new app. You get curated playlists, which may or may not be something that's attractive to you. You get some behind-the-scenes shows that are kind of new. So, yes, you do get some extra, but boy, you're paying a lot of money for it. What's even more interesting with all this is the fact that Amazon appears to be losing at least $2 per subscriber. When it comes down to it, just about all of the $7.99 goes back to the artists and the record labels and the songwriters and the publishers, and also administration, marketing, and all that good stuff about running a business. So Amazon is actually losing $2 per subscriber. Why would they do this? Well, I kind of think it's a hardware play. So in other words, they're hoping that more and more people will actually buy Amazon hardware, like the Echo or the Dot, and there's probably some things coming that we don't know about. Then again, they probably also want to sell more Prime memberships, because at $99 a month, that's certainly a big revenue generator, especially since they already have 60 million subscribers. So Amazon has finally joined the streaming wars, and because of their deep pockets and because of the fact that they really don't need to make money from music, it should be interesting to see how they go up against the Apple Musics and the Spotifys of the world, and we'll see what happens down the road. If you have any questions or comments, you can send them to questions@BobbyOInnerCircle.com. Don't forget to check out my 101 Mixing Tricks program and my other online video courses, and you can do that at BobbyOwsinskiCourses.com. You can also check out my music industry and music production blogs. Just go to BobbyOwsinski.com to find the links, and you can also find excerpts from my books. Now, here's some outside-the-box thinking. There are a number of clubs, not only in the United States but around the world, that are having problems because the neighborhoods they're in are being gentrified. And as condos go up and as hotels go up, all of a sudden there's a lot of noise pollution around coming from the club. So where no one ever complained before, all of a sudden they're getting a lot of complaints from the noise. So as a result, the Nook Amphitheater in Austin, Texas, is looking at something that seems like it's kind of out of the box and revolutionary. They're going to place the speakers from the sound system in the ceiling rather than on the sides of the stage, where you normally see them all the time. And they're turning to a Swedish company called JBN Sound Solutions, who's done 4,600 of these installations around the world, although they haven't done any in the United States yet. So what these systems are, basically they're panels with 10-inch woofers and 6.5-inch dual concentric mids and tweeters. And they've been very successful in installing these in clubs and casinos and resorts and hotels. So it should be very interesting to see what happens. But when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. Why not direct the sound down to where the people are that actually want to hear it? The other byproduct of this is you also create quiet zones in the club. And let's face it, how many times have you gone to a club where you just want to go off somewhere and have a nice quiet conversation, but you can't because it's too loud? So this might be a revolution. It's something that's worth considering. and I can't wait to hear what it sounds like. But the fact that JBN Sound Solutions have already installed 4,600 installations, I would say they know how to do this and are somewhat successful. So let's see what happens in the future. This is definitely out-of-the-box thinking. My guest today is Mike Diaz, who's a sales director of Ultimate Ears in-ear monitors. IEMs are taking the next step from the stage to the studio, and Mike gave me some background on how that's happening, as well as the full rundown on in-ear monitors. I spoke with Mike via Skype from his office in Southern California. Tell me about your background. How did you get into this?
Bobby, I'm a big believer of being in the right place at the right time, and I'm a believer of that because my life is proof of that. Okay, my background has nothing to do with audio, other than being a huge fan of live music growing up, playing in a band growing up, but never doing anything more than getting out of the garage. My true passion is plants, horticulture, and landscape architect, right? And so that's what I did in my first career. In doing that, I met many, many people. This was back in Las Vegas, let's say about 20 years ago. One of the clients that I had that I did a landscape design for and a landscape installation for was an intellectual property attorney. We hit it off quite well. The more time we spent, the more we were talking shop. He said, "Listen, I have some customers of mine that I want you to meet. I think that you can do some marketing for them, perhaps an initial business plan. Let's just see where this goes." And he introduced me to Mindy Harvey, the ex-wife of Jerry Harvey, the original founders of Ultimate Ears.
Okay, but you're sort of in the music business from the standpoint that you were a player. That's important, I think.
Yeah, it's a starting point of it, right? And so at this point in time, it was still a very, very small mom and pop shop catering to the cream of the crop top artists in the world. And I'd be lying if I wasn't a little starstruck by what they did. And so I hit it off with Mindy. Mindy introduced me to Jerry Harvey at the time, and I started doing a lot of ghostwriting for Jerry for some of the trade pubs. It was well before even the term in-ear monitor was really locked into place. So I'd like to say I was taught this trade by some of the best ears in the industry. Jerry took me under his wing. I got to watch and learn. I got to see everything from a first-hand vantage point and pick the eyes and ears and the skills of everybody that was surrounding it at the time, and learn a little from here, learn a little from there, and somehow it all filtered up and stuck.
Is Ultimate Ears the first company to actually do in-ear monitors? I don't know the history, actually. Maybe you can fill me in on what the history of in-ear monitors are.
Yeah, it's a great history, actually. And honestly, no, Ultimate Ears is not the first company to do in-ear monitoring. That had existed well before. But Ultimate Ears was the first company to do a dual driver with crossover. To make something, a better way to say it is to make a product that live music was ready to gravitate towards and adopt. Right? The technology existed before, other people were doing it. It was at that time, let's say, very, very fringe. It was still fringe when Jerry started doing this. He was the sound engineer for Van Halen at the time. And he tried many of the products that were available on the market. They weren't cutting it sonically at the time. He would tinker on the back of the tour bus, splicing and dicing, putting things together, and eventually came across a dual driver balance armature system with the right crossover network. And yeah, that did it. That sounded like a live PA. It sounded like a piece that musicians wanted to play out of. At that point in time, the rest of the band wanted them. Then the opening act wanted them. And by hook and by crook, Mindy and Jerry started a business on the back of a tour bus. Right? There's all these great founder stories of starting in a bedroom, starting in a kitchen. This was a business that was literally born on the back of a tour bus. By payphone, whatever city they happened to be touring through, people would come up, put wads of cash in his hand and say, "I want some too."
Wow. When did the custom impressions come about?
That was part of it, right from the start. All right. The custom impression is the part of this puzzle that makes it sound great. So there's two things, right? Using the balance armatures and the right configuration. At this time, remember, there were no there were no huge orders. There were no huge companies doing balance armature. And the balance armature technology comes from the hearing aid industry. So the designers would pick and choose, hey, this balance armature is kind of big. This one let's see if we can make this one act as the sub. Oh, this one's small with a really, with a high frequency. Let's see if we can get this one to work with the treble and design it as such. Of course, many things have changed in the last 20 years where there's enough gravity from the industry to work with the balance armature manufacturers to make proprietary sound signatures. But this was still early days, right from hearing aid technology, kind of mixing and matching, making it up as everybody went along. The way that a balance armature works and the way that an in-ear monitor works is that it is very seal dependent. You can do this as an example with what you're wearing right now. If you crack open the seal by twisting your monitor up and over, you're going to notice that my voice is changing. All the low end is dropping out of my voice.
Right.
Right. So because the balance armatures operate from, let's say, vibrations of air rather than a lot of motion of air, it's going to vibrate more like a reed on a sax rather than a drum head being hit, right? It's still moving air, but it's not moving the same amount of air. Because of that, the cavity is not what's helping to tune the sound signature. The sound signature is what it is because of the balanced armature. Where again, if you're designing cabinets for speakers, you need to configure in all the enclosure in the cavity so you can get your sound. Balance armatures are independent of that. What that means is they're going to fit in any ear space and be independent of that. But what they do need is they need that full seal in order for you to perceive the low end frequencies. Those you're going to hear through bone conductivity, the low end resonance.
Well, I got to say, they're very impressive. It's funny, I just listened to a lot of different things. I was telling you before, I listened to a bunch of mixes that I did, and I was hearing them very, very clearly, and I was hearing things that I hadn't heard before, and actually thinking to myself, I wish I would have done this differently or that differently. And that hadn't come up before, I have to admit. The fidelity is amazing. I mean, it's much better than I would have thought.
That's the intent of that, right? What you're listening to is a very specific product. It's the Capitol Studio Reference Remastered piece, and it is designed for transparency. It is designed for accuracy. It was voiced in conjunction with the engineers over at Capitol Studios, and in fact, it's our second iteration of the product. The first we call the reference monitors, and this is the Reference Remastered, right?
Yeah.
And again, what it's doing is it's a tool, right? It's there for you to make critical decisions about your mix. And what's beautiful about it is that it translates across the board, right? You make your decisions on your headphones, and they're going to work in a car. They're going to work on a 2-channel. They're going to work in a big room, a small room. It doesn't matter. Sometimes there's certain headphones and the mix sounds wonderful on those headphones, and you put it into a room and it sounds like you're listening to it through headphones. And these don't do that. And it's really, there's no magic formula or secret sauce that we use. It's just physics and math. We're really focused on process, on reliability, on consistency. And what we do, if this is interesting to you or your listeners, a lot of this has to do with the tolerances and what we call pre-binning and pre-sorting, right? So I already talked about the balance armatures that we get from the manufacturers. The balance armatures themselves have a very, very tight tolerance. We then take that tight tolerance and we will pre-spec every piece that comes in. And depending on where it fits in the tolerance, we'll say, okay, this is at the upper range of the tolerance, yeah? This goes into bin A. And this is at the lower range of the tolerance. Let's put this into bin B. And then throughout that process, we'll do that for, there's 3 types of armatures in each one of those. And so we'll do it with all 3 sets. And then we'll say, okay, tweeter from bin A plays nicely with sub from bin C, plays nicely with mid-range for bin D. By doing this, we make much, much, much tighter tolerances than even what our manufacturer gives us. And we're able to match left and right identically. What that does is it allows you to play something when you're mixing and making a critical decision on our in-ears, and to make sure that it places in time and space exactly where you thought you had it.
Now, how does this play into, let's say, a singer, player, engineer who has some hearing loss?
Mm-hmm.
Even just high frequency loss, which is common, especially when you get older, but especially with a lot of musicians, when you're on stage. And I know for me, one ear is a little high-end deficient only because that was where the cymbals were. That's where the drummer was all the time, because I'd always be on the right side of the stage. And as a result, that's part of my hearing that went away. So how do in-ears play into that?
That's a great question. There's two answers to it too. So the first answer is that go back in time 20 years of when these first really started to become in vogue, and there was already a lot of hearing loss, a lot of hearing damage already that had happened, okay? And that couldn't be compensated for, but it could be overcome. What I mean by that is that these have the capacity to run quite hot. The ones that you are listening to, the remaster, are actually quite toned down compared to some of the live pieces. If pressed, they can really push loud.
Mm-hmm.
And that was because most people who were listening already had a certain loss. Now, fast forward to now, where you have a lot of kids not going through the same process that you went through, right? Not performing and already putting themselves at risk or at compromise, and starting right from the get-go using in-ears. We've seen an amazing transformation happen in 20 years where many people feel like, wait, if I'm going to start playing, I need in-ears. I'm giving myself that luxury. I've made it when I'm doing this. I don't want to put myself at risk or exposure. So if I'm playing, I'm going to start doing this the right way. What that happens then is that the monitors are going to block out 25, 26 decibels of ambient noise. So you're going to cut through that cymbal noise already. Yeah, you're going to bring it down to a level that's very in the safe zone. And because of that, you're also enabling yourself to listen at a much, much lower volume level than what you normally would have with monitors, stage monitors. So if used properly, in-ears are going to help prevent that type of exposure. And if there already is some damage, again, by blocking out 26 decibels of the ambient noise, you're not competing with what your brain needs to focus on, and you can raise it up a little bit more. And if there already is significant damage, they definitely go a little hotter than you need to run them at.
One of the things I noticed, I've been playing with these for a couple of days now, is that when I initially put them in, I thought to myself, boy, these are kind of quiet as compared to what I'm used to. Mm-hmm. And I would have to turn everything up to get to what I felt was the level that I was used to. Mm-hmm. And then it kind of dawned on me, wait a second, I'm just hearing differently. And then I found myself dialing it back to where I was used to, just looking at the level control and going, oh yeah, okay, this is kind of where I'm usually at. I'm just hearing differently. Mm-hmm. Again, not having experienced in-ears until now, I would imagine that's something that everybody goes through. There must be an adjustment period, because I'm finding that myself.
Oh, absolutely, right? So you're running a little hot, you start pulling back, you start pulling back, you start pulling back, and you find that very comfortable place where you want to be. Now, there's another thing that's pretty interesting. Because we know that we're sealing out your ear, and we're going to block that natural attenuation in the 2-4K range that your ear anatomy is designed to give you. you're hearing everything at a fairly flat, everything's at the same level. Okay. We, right off the bat, without making it louder, that the Fletcher-Munchausen curve is already existing. It's compensated for that, which means you're hearing things that you don't that your brain wouldn't normally pay attention to, even at much lower volume levels, which is really interesting. And I think that's what you're really saying.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, definitely. I'm pretty sure there's an adjustment period if I'm typical of everybody, but what would be the length of time until someone feels very comfortable with them, do you think?
I think that pretty much varies, but I think about a week using it, you start to trust it. And the more you trust, the more your confidence builds in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. You see this with performers, and they can start staying on pitch, in tune, on time. All of this builds confidence. The more you trust the system, it's a beautiful feedback loop. The more you rely on it, the less you question it, the more you turn it down, and the more it just becomes part of your workflow, part of your stagecraft, where you're not focusing on your tool anymore. You're just using your tool to be creative.
Now, I haven't mixed live sound for a long, long time, so I'm kind of out of it, especially when it comes to monitors. This is a whole different ballgame when it comes to mixing monitors. You're mixing almost like you're mixing in the studio, I would assume. What are the tricks to this? What do you recommend?
The trick you're asking, what are the tricks of mixing live on monitors using in-ears?
Yeah, yeah.
You mean besides for mind reading and
yeah, well, besides the obvious, right? Yeah.
Yeah. It's again translating what you're hearing and what your artist is hearing. Okay. So the best case scenario is that everybody is using the same gear. Mm-hmm. That the monitor engineer is hearing what the vocalist is hearing what the drummer is hearing. And that's not always the case. Okay. That's our ideal world, the world we live in. There are plenty of choices. There are plenty of great companies out there doing in-ear monitors. Most people already show up to a gig with something. It's much rarer nowadays that you see one band all on the same product with the engineer on the same thing. So what that means is that the engineer just needs to be able to translate what they're hearing, trust what they're hearing, and know what the artist is hearing through that. Mm-hmm. Make minor changes. The difference between mixing for a wedge versus mixing for an in-ear, it's more of a laser than a shotgun, right? Just put what's critical into the mix, into the ears, pull more things out, just make minor adjustments as such.
Well, then it's very much like a cue mix in the studio, where for a vocalist, you're just giving the basics so they can stay in pitch and in time, and you're staying away from everything else, and you're keeping it very simple. So I guess it's the same thing.
It's the same thing. And there's one more aspect to this, and there's a few more aspects that maybe we should cover. But by transitioning into in-ears for live sound, you're eliminating free space, which is really critical, okay? You're eliminating what's going to happen as people move around. You're eliminating what's happening as you're moving in position of the floor monitor, or how sound is reflecting off of, let's say, your hat, right? Everything is controlled and contained within the ear mix, which means that you have a lot more consistency night after night, show after show, which again goes back to that trust. You're trusting what you're using, you're trusting what you're hearing. You're building trust amongst your engineer, and you're able to focus on delivering a better show without worrying about the gear. The goal of all of this is for the gear to just disappear and to be invisible, transparent.
How about audience mics? I would think that would be critical to put some audience mics up so you can hear the feedback. Is that true?
Yes and no. It goes back to what you were just saying about the adjustment period. Okay. There are enough mics on stage without having the need of any dedicated audience mics. Just miking a drum kit alone is going to pull in enough audience feedback, but it takes time to get to that point. Okay?
Yeah.
So there are 3 phases of trust or of getting used to something. The first, every in-ear comes with an option of having an ambient option to that. And think of this as sort of a corkscrew, an on-off switch. You allow full ambient bleed to come in. There's a filter in there that's usually around 12 dB filter because it's a balance between letting in stage bleed and still having some low end that we just talked about earlier.
Yeah.
So direct passive feedback is the ambient part, right? That's the first phase. When you're comfortable with that, you seal it up and you move into audience mics that are mixed in. When you're comfortable with that, you're just going to grab the audience feedback from the mics that you're already using and queuing off of.
Okay, makes sense. I can imagine that. Sure.
Yeah.
Looking at your product list, I noticed that there were some models that were specific for different players, for bass players, for instance, as opposed to singers and guitar players. So what's the differentiation there?
Yeah, great question. And again, there's no right or wrong answer to this. We're just trying to make it easier for people to decide. They're all sound signatures. They all are going to do the exact same thing. They're going to seal you up and eliminate the 26 dB of ambient noise. They're all going to deliver a critical mix. It just has to do with the flavor of sound that's being delivered. And so I like to always talk about it in terms of ice cream. Who doesn't like going out for ice cream, right? My daughter loves it. I love it.
Yeah.
You know, you might like vanilla, I might like mint chip, but it's still ice cream and we're still going out for it. It just comes down to a flavor at that point in time. Our flavors are only suggestions, right? The one that we recommend for singers and guitarists is voiced heavily in the mid-range. It has some really nice growl. The one that we recommend for bass players and drummers has a sub that's fairly heavy in the low end. And that's what it just comes down to. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Any of the pieces need to be able to play in any position, okay? Because we don't know exactly what somebody's going to do with them, right? We've never known right from the get-go, right? You might put a vocalist on the same product as what the drummer's on. They're going to have different needs and they're going to have different things that they're listening to in the mix. And that's the job of the engineer, is to be able to boost certain things, cut things, roll things. All the product can take whatever you're throwing at it in any which way. It's just, if you're not touching the board or changing the signature, how it's voiced to begin with. Did that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. So it's all around voicing then, the difference in the models. Yeah.
It's around voicing. And many manufacturers then kind of try to make this about how many armatures, how many speakers are crammed into the real estate. And it's not a conversation that we like to have, because I think that's more like Enron accounting. Okay. Having 18 drivers, speakers in the small real estate doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have more low end. It just means, you know, how are you counting what those speakers really are, or how many more ways are you opening up for failure to happen? So while most people would like to talk about the ever escalating war of driver number, would rather just talk about what it's voiced for and what problems it solves.
I mean, I'm amazed you can get two in such a small space, let alone more than that.
I'm amazed I can count to 18. So well, anything past that's above and beyond.
Really, you're serious? There's 18 drivers in some?
You know, this is an arms race for what end, I'm not sure. But yeah, it's a game that people like to play.
Oh, amazing. Amazing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Another way to talk about this is pixels in cameras or photos, right? There's, for a while, when the quality is very pixelated, it makes a difference to list the spec. Once you get to a point, then it becomes a moot point to continue to argue.
Yeah. And the same thing with processor speed with computers. It got to a point where it doesn't matter anymore. So, yeah.
Yeah.
I hear you. Okay, let's talk about laser impressions. I was really impressed with the fact that you measured my ears with the laser. That's very cool. Is Ultimate Ears the only company that does that?
Yeah, in the music space, we are.
Yeah.
And so, you know, all of this kind of just ties into what we were just talking about. Rather than continuing to double down on specs or processor speed, we took a big step back and we said, let's talk about the customer journey. Let's talk about making this easy. And let's talk about making this accessible for everybody. Rather than how do we get 18 drivers or 20 drivers or what that looks like, how do we just make sure that these are available to everybody?
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And so we chose to really push the boundaries, both technically and sales and marketing, in that direction. And so the 3D scanning is one of those areas. We thought to ourselves, look, getting in-ears is such a pain. You have to get off the road. You have to go to an audiologist. You have to get goo squirted in your ear. You have to sit there with a bite block in your mouth and strings hanging out, and you look like a fool, and everyone comes and takes pictures of you. And there's nothing wrong with that. That process has worked, and that process has got us to here. We did that over 100,000 times in the history of our 20-year career. And we said, what else can we do, and how can we reinvent that, and how do we just make it that much easier? And what if there was a way that we could get this information and it never degraded, right? Because those physical impressions degrade over time. They start shrinking right away. There's a shelf life to them.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
After 2 years, you got to go through the process again. Right? You can mark your tours by where you stopped and got squirted.
Yeah.
So we started to envision what this could look like. And before we got to the laser scanner that you saw, we said, look, one day something like this will happen. Something where you can just wave a wand by your ear like Star Trek will eventually happen. And when we first started this journey, that there was nothing that was available. You could dream it, but the technology wasn't there yet. We said, okay, when this is available, we want to be ready for that. So what does being ready for that mean? Well, it means we have to work within a digital realm. And there's a lot of similarities between everything that the studios went through over the last 20 years. Okay, how do we go from tape to digital? And so we said, this is our current process of when we get these physical impressions, but how do we digitize those? And then from once they're digitized, how do we cut, wax, grind, alter, all the things that we need to do in order to make a very comfortable fit for you? How do we do that in the digital world? So we looked into all the medical technologies for dentistry, for knee surgery, knee replacements. We looked at the 3D animation of what you watch when you're watching a Pixar movie, right? Like, how do you digitally model a character? How do you digitally model an impression? So we mastered that art. Then we said, okay, now that we've digitized this, what do we do? How do we get it back into the analog form? How do we 3D print this? And I'm not talking about a little Home Depot MakerBot printer. I'm talking about a state-of-the-art 3D additive printer that allows us to batch print 40 units at a time, using laser, a UV laser that hits a liquid vat of acrylic that builds this up in a topographic map that looks, if you look at what's in your ear, that was all 3D printed.
Wow.
You see no striations. You see it's perfectly crystal clear. It's not milky. You'd never know it was 3D printed unless I told you.
Yeah, right.
And that's by design, right? For a year and a half, we ran two lines of our division. One was being hand poured the old way, and the other was being 3D printed the new way. And we didn't want to bias the data by saying, oh, Bobby, you got a 3D printed unit, right? We wanted to really get thousands of units out in the field and compare fit returns, issues, any possibility of a return. We wanted to make sure that this was, that we were doing something for the sake of bettering the product rather than just for being technologically savvy. And we found that after a year and a half of doing this without telling anybody, we heard two things. Anecdotally, we kept hearing how much better they sound, which makes sense because the better they fit, the better that they sound. But that's anecdotal. That doesn't work for Logitech for Ultimate Ears. What does work is that we're able to compare our return rate for fit or comfort issues, and we halved our rate, which was already historically low for the industry. We halved it by doing this. So we said, okay, we now have a system in place where we can take the physical impressions, we can digitize them, and we can do it all the way through. Now, how do we complete that loop, and how do we find that Star Trek tool? And we found that in a partner who manufactures the scanning system that you saw. And we have a 5-year exclusive for anything in the music world, for professional audio, studio, or touring or rehearsing. And that's only Ultimate Ears. And what that's allowed us to be able to do is the next huge leap in innovation, I think. When you talk about access, we are now able to be in rental houses or tour companies or MI retail stores, right? So that same process of the 3D scan that you saw is now available up and down the West Coast in all of your favorite MI stores, all of your favorite rental houses. You walk in, you get a scan because it's there, it's convenient, it's quick and easy, and you forget about it. And then when you're in Perth, Australia, and you have a problem or you need a set of ears, you call. They can be they can be modeled, they can be printed, and they can be shipped to you in the next day.
It's pretty amazing. Pretty amazing.
I think so. I mean, again, it's about access. It's not about doing something to make it complicated, to make a complex system just because we can. We have a much different philosophy about what can we take out of a system to make it easy rather than what we can put into it.
Yeah.
But the goal is not to be able to call somebody who you know as a hey bro deal. The goal is to be everywhere and anywhere and to be just simple. You walk in, you try something, you heard about it, and you forget about it. It's that easy.
The process was incredibly easy. It was what, 10 minutes at the most?
Yeah.
It was easy. Didn't have to do anything.
No, and how often do you get to see the inside of your ear in 3D, being built right in front of you on a screen?
Yeah, well, that's true. That's true. That's the added benefit.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not sure that many people want to see that, but yeah.
In-ear monitors are kind of standard for live sound. What brought you to going to Capitol and to maybe taking on the next level of this, which is for the studio?
Another great question, thanks. And it does really fit into our vision about just always pushing the boundaries. Right? We were born in live sound. We were in live sound, and we thought, what else? We are not just a live sound company. We're an audio company. So where are we missing and what are we not doing? And we saw all the benefits that stage musicians were getting from using in-ear monitors, and we thought that engineers should have the same level of access and ability. Nobody gets the luxury of working in the same room over and over and over without traveling nowadays. And so we wanted to be able to solve that problem, and Capitol, the engineers over at Capitol Studios were the perfect partner to do that with.
Yeah. So far, so good.
Thank you. And we're doing the same thing right now. We're saying, okay, look, it's not just live sound. It's not just studio engineers, but how do we work with dialogue editors? How do we work with cutters? How do we work with production, all the backline guys? And so you see Ultimate Ears continuously push the envelope of ease, of simplicity, and of just delivering something that works, that you can depend on, that you can count on, that you can trust. And you'll see that with our new Boom Mic Plus system that we're introducing, that you have a sneak peek of. You'll see that as we just continue to move into new ways and just make things easy for everybody. Yeah,
well, the Boom Mic system is very cool, that's for sure. Last question. What is the best piece of music advice or business advice or music business advice that you've either determined yourself over the years or maybe somebody imparted to you?
That's a great question. I think that I'm just gratefully lucky to be surrounded by people who are always pushing the boundaries, who are always asking more of the system. And for me, what that comes down to is always be curious, always be passionate, always keep asking. The minute that you stop learning, the minute that you stop seeing how things fit into the larger picture, is the minute you stagnate, the minute you stop. One of my all-time heroes, you started the conversation asking about my background, and I told you, I was a gardener, a landscaper, a horticulturalist. One of my all-time heroes is a gardener named Bill Mollison, who just passed, the founder of permaculture. And I think they say it best, or he said it best, that the weakest link in any system is the designer, right? How do you shift the jigsaw puzzle around where the output of one thing is the input of another? And in learning, if you can think in that term, in that aspect, how is something that seems as a byproduct for me and what somebody else is needing? And I think when you master that art, you really make magic happen.
To find out more about Ultimate Ears, go to pro.ultimateears.com. Ultimate Ears is one word, pro.ultimateears.com. Thanks for listening and being in my inner circle. Remember, if you have any questions or comments, please send them to questions@BobbyOInnerCircle.com. To listen to other episodes of Bobby Owsinski's Inner Circle, go to BobbyOwsinski.com and select the podcast tab, or you can go to BobbyOInnerCircle.com or find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Mixcloud, or Google Play. At BobbyOwsinski.com and BobbyOInnerCircle.com, you'll also find a sign-up form for my newsletter and for alerts for new podcasts. This is Bobby Owsinski. I will see you next time.